Welcome to NOTeD, News of the Day, brought to you by the True Health Initiative. I am Dr. Tom Rafai, lifestyle medicine specialist and Flexitarian and very Reducetarian friendly, I'll tell you. And we are now with and happy to interview the president and co-founder of the Reducetarian Foundation and lead producer of the new movie documentary, Meet Me Halfway. Meet, M-E-A-T, me, halfway. Brian Kateman, thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. We really appreciate it here on behalf of the True Health Initiative.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to chat with you.
Oh, this is great. And I had a chance to watch the movie last night. It was very touching. And it was, I think I conveyed this to you. Your dad to me was the star. You know, I see him as one of my patients over and over. And it was wonderful to see that wrap up. But before we get into the movie, and I want people to really stick around for this, but if you're in a rush, I want you, if you don't mind, Brian, right now to tell people where they can get access to the movie if they're like, you know what, I just want the bottom line, I want to see this show, and I'll come back and watch Tom and Brian later. How can they watch Meet Me Halfway?
Yeah, for folks who are in the United States, to start, it's available on Apple TV, on Amazon, Google Play, YouTube, Vimeo on demand. For folks who are in English-speaking territories, it's on Apple TV and some of those others. And then internationally, it's on Vimeo on demand. So anyone in the world can see it.
Wonderful. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long. It captivates you. It keeps you engaged the entire time. I watched it. Well, I won't say what I watched on, then I'll seem like I'm promoting a certain company. It was not difficult to get to.
Nice.
So in general, we know that Reducetarianism and Flexitarianism hold this tough position, and we could clearly see you trying to balance, which is, yes, we definitely want to be more plant forward. We want to be more plant predominant. We also realize that maybe for ourselves, right, or the overall world, it would probably not be realistic for everyone to go plant pure. So how about people just move in the right direction? Let's be honest, that's the only way it's going to work anyway. And tell me then why, I think actually the movie told a good story, but please watch it. But as we're here now, maybe if you can even dig a little deeper, what is it that drove your passion for this cause? What was that moment, or if there was one, that just said,
Well, short of it is, I grew up in Staten Island, New York, which if you're familiar with New York City, Staten Island is not thought of as a particularly progressive place in general, but also in terms of access to food. It's not like I was surrounded by, swanky plant-based restaurants. I didn't know a single, vegan or vegetarian growing up. I did, however, spend a lot of time in nature, and that's one thing I really appreciate about Staten Island. And so by the time I got to college, I was kind of your typical environmentalist. I would tell people they should recycle, that they should, not use plastic bottles and so on. And at some point, a friend gave me a book called The Ethics of What We Eat by Peter Singer and Jim Mason. And that was the first time I learned about factory farming and how simply consuming way too many animal products in terms of our health, in terms of environmental issues that at the time I really cared about, like biodiversity loss and climate change and deforestation, and including, of course, issues around animal welfare. The reality is we kind of stuff animals in these intensive conditions, and because of that, they're quite cruel. So it's kind of just an awakening for me. I wanted to be sort of the best version of myself that I could possibly be. So I said I'm going to go vegetarian on my way to being vegan. And what I found was that for the most part, that did work out. I was happy living a life that was in line with my values. I did feel sort of lighter. I had acne when I was younger. My skin sort of cleared up. But occasionally I would find myself kind of falling off the plant-based bandwagon, as they say. At Thanksgiving, I remember popping a piece of turkey in my mouth. I was once out with friends to an IHOP pancake house, and remember the waiter kind of taking a plate away of my friend, and there was a piece of bacon on it. And I thought, wow, this bacon's going to go to waste anyway. I really miss eating bacon. So I popped the bacon in my mouth. And I started to kind of get flack from people. Like on the one hand, vegans would say that I was essentially a hypocrite, that I was a lazy vegetarian, that I was a cheating vegan. And then my omnivore friends, which is almost more comical because they're eating, like the average American, over 200 pounds of meat a year. They would just kind of say that I was trying to claim that I was a so-called better person, when in fact I was just as immoral and flawed as they were, or something like that. And I decided that, okay, I'm not going to call myself vegan or vegetarian. It's not really the point. The point is that I just want to try to eat as many plant-based meals as reasonably possible. I don't really care about being perfect or pure or anything like that. And I did come across a word like flexitarian, and that essentially describes my own diet. But here's the thing, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this too. A flexitarian, as I understand it, is someone who predominantly eats plant-based foods, but occasionally includes animal products in their diet. And that describes my diet and has historically. But people like my father, who, folks who see the film will meet, is probably not going to be a flexitarian anytime soon. He eats, historically did eat over 200 pounds of meat a year. And my goal with him was to get him to eat 10% less or 20% less. So in other words, his diet is still predominantly animal-based meat. However, he has made some small shifts in his diet, his leaning into incorporating more plant-based foods. In my mind, he's a reducetarian, not a flexitarian. It's an umbrella term, reducetarian. It's meant to describe anyone who's cutting back on the amount of animal products that they consume. Some reducetarians are vegan, some vegetarian, some flexitarian, some very much an omnivore, but are kind of slowly making some shifts in their diet. So at any rate, that's kind of the origin story of reducetarian and where the word came from as a useful device and set of thinking to really get people to stop thinking about meat consumption as an all or nothing premise, especially for people like my father, who, let's be honest, he's not going to go vegan in his lifetime, and he's not going to go vegetarian, and he's probably not going to be flexitarian. But I am hopeful that he will continue on the journey of trying to just slightly incorporate more plant-based foods in his diet, and that's a beautiful thing for him and for the world.
I love it. And I would say, I hear what you're saying. You have a really nice ability when you coin a term to control it, and that is wonderful. We do, and as a flexitarian leader, I will say, amongst my people, I am trying to encourage the same type of approach, that it's really a matter of movement. Now, we might talk about blue belt, black belt, or green belt, and that might be one thing. But to me, as far as the clinical approach I take, we want people to just consider that ratio shift. And to me as well, it's a flexitarian in the making, at least, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's more along the lines of, are you moving in that direction? And how much do you need of whatever to not want to kill me until the next visit? And, and keep coming back, and we'll keep working on it. So I think that there's an overlap. If you, and if I may say, the Flexitarian Revolution, which is a book I'm writing, will try to make that argument that we're going to take it to a different level and open it up. And as far as I'm concerned, they're really Reducetarian and Flexitarian are one and the same. Where I see the biggest difference is that a lot of people in the Flexitarian approach are still more, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, it's everyone's choice, but I don't want to say self-centered in a way that sounds negative. Let me try to put this in a better way. They're primarily focused on their personal health. There you go.
Right.
And since we don't edit NOTeD, that's not coming out what I just said. But but a secondary benefit, many are concerned, but I have to admit, not all flexitarians are, is planetary health. And if I'm not mistaken, there is definitely a primary goal in terms of, and I'm personally also as a flexitarian have as a personal goal, although I don't really put it out forth as much, the idea of earthly sustainability, that they can be one and the same. So there's my answer there. Thank you. That was awesome. I do want to ask a question about your friend who gave you the book. And what was the story? What was the story there? Was it, Brian, I see you doing all this other stuff, but you really, what you're trying to do, you really ought to consider food? Or how did that conversation of the book, The Ethics of What We Eat, get handed to you? That's what we do on NOTeD. We want to get a little granular there.
I'm really glad you asked that question. It's funny. That friend texted me, right before the film came out, and his name's Jonathan, and he said, I'm so glad I could play kind of a small part in your story, because it was quite random. Truthfully, we were in a class together. We were flying to present some undergraduate research on climate change at a conference. And I think he knew that I was very much interested in environmental issues. And he, in an unrelated circumstance, as part of another class, was given this book. And I remember specifically eating a hamburger on the plane at the time that he gave it to me. And I think for him, he just thought I might be interested in it. I don't think it was done in jest, or kind of, he just thought I had this book, and, we're on this flight together, and I, was looking for something to do, and he gave it to me. And I'm pretty sure I finished close to the entire book on the plane ride. But it is a remarkable thing how we spend so much time planning and designing our lives, and then there's just occasionally these random moments that completely shift our thinking and our understanding about the world. And that was definitely one of them for me. So, I was in college at the time. It took me a little bit of time, but eventually, in kind of at the end of college, I did decide to go vegetarian on my way to being vegan, and that's kind of when the insanity started around, just adjusting to that life and receiving feedback from people in my life on both sides of the aisle. So yeah, that's the story about that book.
It is a tough balance, isn't it? I mean, it's not lost upon me at all in coming from a clinical, flexitarian advocacy, that the struggle you went through and are going through is very close to my heart. And that's what said to me, stop the presses. I've been following the Reducetarian Foundation at a distance, in a sense, because of what I do. I get the emails. I'm like, okay, this is cool. This is cool. When this came out, I would say, Brian, good job. This is the tool, this documentary, to break through to a wider audience.
Right.
And that's really you're to be commended. As far as the movie goes, where did the seed? I think it's been years in the making, correct? Or
it has been, yeah.
And so, where did that seed get planted, if you will? No pun intended.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've always loved communications. I love large scale projects, and I always knew, once I was starting Reducetarian Foundation, and that happened around end of 2014, I knew we were going to be a vehicle for spreading this idea. And so, it's in some ways it's kind of obvious, right? Like, you do events, you do books, you do things that will help spread the message, you create social media campaigns and so on. But one thing I noticed was that there really was an influx of kind of go vegan documentaries, many of them which are fantastic, all leading back all the way to, from Cowspiracy to What the Health, and more recently Seaspiracy and Game Changers and so on. And many of them take a kind of go vegan perspective, and there's a value in that. I wish more people were vegan and so on. But there really hasn't been a eat less meat documentary. There hasn't been a documentary that I think is willing to, I'm just going to say it, take on a more kind of nuanced message, a more exploratory message, rather than saying, here's the answer. Simply asking a question and looking at all the different answers. And that's really what I wanted this film to be. I wanted a film that did not have a simple conclusion, that allowed people to understand the complexities involved in thinking about our diet. And what's so cool about it, my biased perspective, is because we started filming, if I'm not mistaken, around 2016, 2017, you can really see my own evolution. I was just, I'm only 31, but I was like 24 when I started this. I had no expert training. I was just a guy who wanted the world to be a better place. And so, for me, halfway through the film, you start to see a shift, because one of the messages around the film is that simply telling people anything is not enough. Like, I thought if you just stop telling people to go vegan, you start telling them to eat less meat, everyone would change. But what I realized, and I learned this years in, is that the system is kind of rigged. It's very easy to keep eating factory farmed animal products, to go to fast food restaurants that are cheap and accessible and absolutely delicious. It's hard to ask someone to make these what amount to very big changes. Even asking someone to eat less meat can be very difficult. So what I like about the film is halfway through, it kind of shifts in perspective to, okay, if people are going to keep eating meat, what other kinds of options are out there? And I just see this as one example to you, as someone who started this process many years ago. Like, I genuinely learned a ton along the way, both in filming the documentary and, just continuing to do this work. And so I really am, making a documentary is hell. It's a very difficult experience, especially over 5 years. But I think it really comes across that authentic learning that I went through as a result. So I'm really, really grateful for that.
It does. It really does. The movie, if there's one thing it comes off as, very much so, is authentic. And, you're absolutely correct. There's a number of things that are set up against us. People, for instance, have to be ready to change. They have to know the purpose they want to change. And we're living in an environment that promotes, my term, and is now published in the American Journal of Health Promotion, literally, is CRAP, which is calorie rich, refined, and highly processed, but pronounced the same way as what you thought. But a technical term that is surrounding us. We're swimming in it. It's practically, we're drowning in it, and it's so tempting. And as far as factory farming, it is amazing to me. I had to literally, at one point, I thought, I'm a past president of the American Board of Physician Nutrition Specialists, and I don't even know a farmer. So I went down to a downtown in Detroit, where we have a farmer's, essentially a large farmer's market. And I said, I want to meet a farmer. I'm just going to find a farmer. And I met Dan Haday, and he's a grass-fed farmer. He took me to an auction. He showed me what was going on. And obviously we saw, Food Inc. And you go to some of these facilities, and even as a flexitarian and probably would never end up being totally vegan, you look at that and say, is this really right? This is not right, And as a physician, with the antibiotic use, it's over half the antibiotics are used for animal feed. It's ramping up antibiotic resistance. It begs the question of things that even are beyond us, So kudos to you. I think that is it's fantastic that you have been willing to go and talk about this topic in a very sensitive manner to both sides, because you make a good point. The truth is probably in the middle, and the middle is the hardest place to be. Good job, man.
I appreciate it. Yeah, and everyone comes at this from such different, not just perspectives, but their life experience is different. So you really clearly see my dad has, my mom has their own life experience. The farmer that I meet, Will, who's a hero, and in my opinion, has his own background and experience. And I, as a millennial growing up in the way that I did. So, part of it is whether someone watches the film and they have their favorite strategy, whether it's go vegan or eat less meat, or meat from not a factory farm, or plant-based meat, or so on. Part of it is just a message of compassion that it's tempting to be just angry all the time that the world, doesn't look like the way we want it to. And I think that anger can be useful in terms of activating us, but I don't think people are the enemy. And I don't think it's productive to think less of people that are not doing what we want. I think it's more productive to understand their perspective and have compassion for them. And there's this comical scene in the film, right, where I'm arguing with my parents, and you can tell that I'm frustrated and I'm angry, and of course it's family, and this is but I think that in watching that scene, you can kind of just see how difficult it is to get people to come around to your side. And there's a hopeful ending around that in respect to my dad. But yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it being understanding and compassionate to all sides is what was very important to me. And I'm sure the film was going to upset some people, because if you are convinced that your one strategy is the answer, presenting all these other strategies on equal playing field is going to be difficult. But the reality is that anything that is not factory farming, anything that is not a person eating factory farmed meat, in my opinion, is better. Anyone moving in the direction of a better world should be celebrated, even if it's not perfect. Because as you mentioned at the top, that's really the only way progress is going to happen anyway. So we have to be understanding of that.
I think I'd like to suggest that we have a new term we consider, and that is progress is perfection. You
I
know,
love that.
if you ask me, and this goes in terms of clinical experience, it may be helpful in that regard, but when working with people who are maybe burdened with being perfect or not, by the way, the last word said in Black Swan, watch what she said, well, watch what was happening to her as she was falling in the movie Black Swan, the actress of which I forget, but you may remind me in just a second.
Is that Natalie Portman?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
It wasn't a positive use of the word. But that being said, if a gold medalist is training to become a gold medalist on the balance beam, is not the 3,483rd fall of the 6,807 that it took for her or him to get a gold medal not perfect for that moment? Because that moment, that slip, they learned from it. And without it, it would never have resulted in the gold medal. So as far as I'm concerned, being a presentalist, someone, you know, is in the moment and being present, I just made that word up. Progress is perfection. In fact, this would be an approach that I'd say is, if we're ever going to use that word, is the only way. We will never titanically shift this short of a meteor coming and wiping out all of us. And the only path out is step by step. And this is a great discussion in that regard. Progress is perfection, man. I think that in that case, this is a perfect movie for people to check out and just feel the honesty, feel the real, true, genuine nature of it. And I think, and wrap it up with the end. I don't want to even talk about the ending with your dad. I just say, just watch it, watch the movie, okay? And of course, we have to mention our founder, Dr. David Katz, appears
Right.
in it. Another member, Dr. Walter Willett, is in the movie, and which are pretty big players, everyone, just so you know. And Brian, by the way, I'm going to put you on the spot. Are you a member yet of the True Health Initiative? And if not, can we show you our pledge? And I think you'll like it. And I nominate you here on NOTeD to become part of the True Health Initiative Council of Advisors.
I'd love to learn more about it. That sounds awesome. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, you know what? If you don't mind, tell me a little bit more. And this is a NOTeD, this is the personality of NOTeD. What is a typical day of Brian's eating now? What did you have for breakfast? By the way, I mean, I'm not throwing me under the bus. You can ask me too, but I get to ask at least the first question. So, what's a typical, breakfast that Brian might have? And what's your non-negotiable? Is there still any room in the animal food world? Again, I would be willing to talk about my own too.
Sure. Well, let me answer that by just telling you where I started out, which was I genuinely basically never had vegetables growing up. I mean, sincerely, I had pizza. If it was like a special occasion, we'd go to Applebee's. I'd get like buffalo wings. We'd go to Chili's. I'd get a burger. You have to really imagine that just the idea of eating broccoli was just plain silly. I mean, that just never would have happened when I was a kid. And, my parents tried a little, but it was pretty normal for us to go to McDonald's and through the drive-through and get a Happy Meal, basically once a day. And I had, soda constantly. So that's the background I grew up in. And you see in the film, my parents, they say, we thought pizza was a health food. And they even say there were scientists who, would say that it had different components that were good for a healthy life. And I believe that's in part where, Dr. David Katz comes in to explain to me how this could be possible, that my parents could think that. When I made the transition, I ate pasta and bread basically all the time. It wasn't like I was like, I'm going to have salads all the time. No, it was a process for me because I wasn't used to eating those foods. I didn't know what you ate as a person who, wasn't going to have meat at the center of the plate. So I have changed a lot since then, which is really cool. I try to eat as many whole plant-based foods as possible. That's really where I'm at. And I just feel better of course, from the ethical and the environmental perspective, but the whole component is good for my health, but I also feel good as a result of that. So for breakfast, I often will have oatmeal. I'll sometimes have like a smoothie, and I think that's mentioned in the film. I have occasionally like a really healthy protein bar that I like that is relatively low in sugar. I'm not a huge breakfast eater though, so I often will have a pretty big lunch. And that usually looks like a quinoa bowl or some kind of like Thai curry or Indian curry. I love, and I know like just legitimately, one of my favorite snacks, that's healthy snacks, is just putting kale in sauteed with some oil and some salt and pepper, and love that. Feel really good. Um, I have popcorn a lot at night. I'll have like a little bit of popcorn. Um, yeah, but like this is the thing. On the whole, I just try to keep it pretty simple. I eat the foods I always loved, but I kind of swap in alternatives. So if I'm having a burrito, I just don't get chicken anymore. I get avocado. Or if I'm getting like the curries I used to get at a Thai or Indian restaurant, I get tofu instead. I love to cook now, but I really try to keep everything very simple and approachable because you have to, especially as people are making the change. I love nuts as a snack, which are good in protein. So yeah, that's kind of the typical day. I don't, look, if you came over my house, let's say you and I are hanging out, and you bring over a plate of cookies, and you're like, hey, I brought these cookies for you, Brian. I'm not gonna ask you if they're vegan. I just don't care. I really don't. It's a rounding error on an otherwise relatively moral, healthy, friendly lifestyle. And I almost have a kind of, anger toward the idea that it should even be a point of discussion. Of course, if someone, of course, if it's who they are and they want to be that way, completely fine. It could be a dietary restriction, totally get it. But for me personally, I am perfectly fine being like 95 plant-based, and I just don't sweat the rest of it. And I think for the majority of people, that is an excellent goal, that we should not worry about being perfect all the time, because in no area of my life am I perfect. I try to be the best husband I can be. I try to be the best dog father I can be, the best son I could be. I'm never perfect. I do the best I can, and that's enough for me.
Brian, you are perfect as far as I'm concerned. Now, I did notice, the ring, and so I'm going to ask about spousal support in a second. I will be,
Oh, nice.
and I don't know that we talked about this, but since it's not no longer private, I deal with binge eating disorder. I lost my youngest brother to binge eating disorder. So before I was married, I admitted to my wife, before I made it public, look, what you're about to get into is I can have just about anything in my life, but in my face is a different story. Like in the house, it's there's just issues somewhat akin to alcoholism, if you will, but it's not like I can't have this or that once in a while. It's just chronically sitting in front of me, too impulsive, etc. That being said, what are what are the ramifications with your wife? If what's the deal there?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, right? Like and I think of my friends and family too in this category, and I'm happy to talk about my wife, but it's like you're a person and then you have an awakening and then you completely change, who you are in some respects. So, I used to go to Applebee's with my friend Dan when we were in college, basically every night for happy hour, and we'd get buffalo wings, mozzarella sticks, and spinach artichoke dip. That was like what we get. And at some point it's like, oh, I can't do that anymore, man. I can't go here anymore because I don't eat like that. So there's just this very weird transition where, and then, the person like, they'll start eating meat in front of you and they're like, oh, is this okay? And there's all this strange awkwardness. And I've never been the kind of person who wants to, force people to do anything. So it was kind of similar with my wife. I think she had a healthier diet than me. She grew up eating a more wide variety of foods. So in many respects, it was helpful to have her as a partner because she took me to an Indian restaurant for the first time because I had never had Indian food before. She took me to a Thai restaurant before and I had never had Thai food. So there was this kind of mutual, I think, benefit, because I think as a result of me, she started to significantly cut back on animal products. And as a result of her, I was able to expand my palate from pasta to a variety of other plant-based foods. But
it's fair to say she's on board then.
Oh, she's totally on board, and very much, like me, doesn't identify as vegan, but embraces a predominantly plant-based diet. And, I'll say this to you though, in the documentary, there's a scene where I go to a pig vigil. I watch pigs on the way to be slaughtered. You don't see the slaughter, but you're outside the slaughterhouse, and it's a very emotional scene, stylistically and personally. And I do remember coming away from that moment feeling very isolated, because I remember thinking, damn, like I'm going to go hang out with my wife, her parents. And I just had this like very strange experience, and I can tell them about it, but it's hard to describe what this was like. So this is to say, again, just being honest, like as you discover components of the world, um, and other people haven't seen what they've seen, or they've reached a different conclusion than you, I think that can be quite difficult. And so it is helpful to, not you, I don't, everyone has to do with it. Like, I don't want to cut out friends in my life who still eat over 200 pounds of meat a year. But I do like having a support system of people who are vegan and vegetarian and flexitarian and so on, who understand why it is that I'm doing what I do. So, yeah. And
So she's good. So she has, you think you led in a certain way, but she came aboard and she is supportive of
definitely,
your journey, right?
definitely. Yes. And
Now,
that's important. Yeah.
so as a guy with a Middle Eastern, my parents came from Syria. Now I have to kind of advocate for the Middle East. You mentioned Thai, you mentioned Indian. I just want to show you this beautiful, this is going to be flexitarian because of a little yogurt, but this is mujadara. Have you ever heard of mujadara? It's
No.
lentils with cracked wheat in the center, surrounded by what's called a Lebanese salad around. And then I don't have the fried onions on top. I just rather just have them be. They're right there though.
Nice.
You can have those on top. They're super tasty. And it can come with or without the yogurt. You don't have to have the yogurt if you don't want. So try a mujadara sometime, man. It's a great lentil-based dish in a Middle Eastern restaurant.
I'll have to.
Yeah.
There's so, because when you're used to just eating, a wing and a loin and a burger, there's so many interesting plant-based foods out there that, of course, I'm still discovering more and more.
Yes, I love the legumes. I'm a legume lover. That being said, what was the most notable off-screen moment in the movie? I just can't imagine that something didn't happen off-screen. Should this go in or not? I think you probably kept in a lot of what was others might not include, because you want that. That's where the authenticity comes in. But was there something off camera that nobody knows about that you can give noted, the first place that people learn that in Meet Me Halfway actually happened?
There's so many. I mean, there's a lot of funny and scary moments. And then there's the intellectual moments. Maybe I'll do one of each. We were driving once. I forget where we were. It might have been in Georgia or I can't remember. But I remember being on like this mountain cliff, and I just remember driving. My co-director Journey was driving, and there was no railing. We were just so high up, and I just remember thinking, like, we're gonna die. Like, we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no railing. We're so close to the edge. I remember taking a taxi with someone driving like 120 miles an hour. I just remember all these moments of feeling uncomfortable, quite frankly. Like, I'm a pretty risk averse person. And the documentary really pushed me outside my comfort zone and so many levels. There were really beautiful shots. Actually, in particular, there's a scene in the documentary where there's all these news kind of clips that come on. And in the original version, the audio was there of the news clips, but we had these very artistic shots of ice melting to represent climate change, and a spinning globe with a fireplace behind it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I watched the film recently, and I was like, oh, those were so beautiful. But they were too abstract, and they weren't literal enough. And we did some testing to see this. So there's so many moments that have been, we shot probably 200 hours worth of content, and 80 minutes made it in. The one major intellectual component that is not in the final cut, but is actually a deleted scene for the iTunes Extra. So for folks who buy the film, they can see this 4-minute clip.
That's right.
There's a scene in which Will Harris educates me on his perspective. And Will Harris is a farmer that raises animals in the sort of most humane, most sustainable way possible, who is essentially putting forth his view that in order to cultivate the soil in healthy ways, you need to use animals and ruminants to do what they do. And that's going to increase the soil quality and water and store carbon and so on. And he jokes with me, he says, eat your effing tofu, like enjoy it, meaning like you're supporting monocultures and you're supporting all these plant-based foods that are not necessarily good for the environment. And, it's a fair point. Sometimes plant-based foods are not grown in the most sustainable ways. They typically have lower carbon emissions and use less water and so on. But from a soil quality perspective, it can be quite varied depending on the production methods. So we actually go visit a woman named Helen, who is a farmer, and she grows plants without the fruits and veggies and so on, without the use of ruminants, and puts forth this idea that regenerative agriculture is essential and it's very important, much like Will argues, but that in her opinion, animals are not necessarily a required component. So we didn't include that from the film because it was essentially not directly answering the question, which is what does the future of meat look like? But this is such a complicated issue that of course we were going to tackle other issues that didn't relate to the central thread, and I learned a lot off camera as well. So you can check out that extended
scene. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And then do you think there is, has this left you with, I did this bucket list check off, or is there a potential ever in your life, another documentary? You may not know, obviously, but at this point, would you say, you know what, I would do another one of those? Or is it like, man, I'm done, just like after a UFC fight, speaking of game changers, let me take a break.
That's a good question. Yeah, I've joked like we could have, meet me at 3/4 of the way, and then, meet me 7/8 of the way, and then meet me all the way. It's really interesting. This very much is my thesis. I mean, it feels like the completion of many years of work, and I love the film and I love intellectually what it stands for. And it feels like, I'm sure I'll continue to learn, but it feels like it's, a very good, I don't expect we'll do a sequel to Meet Me Halfway is kind of my point. However, I found it very challenging to make a film, but it was kind of addictive. And I would love to come across another intellectual idea that I think is worth, putting in that resource in. We do have a Meet Me Halfway book that's coming out in the spring of 2022, which is the written version of the film and does actually include a lot more content than we could fit in 80 minutes. So I feel happy about that. I kind of have the ability to put all this additional information in that's in my brain, including the components about regenerative agriculture, which we just talked about. But yeah, I never say never. I would be very much open to doing a film. It'd probably be easier the second time around than the first. Anytime you do something for the first time, it can be challenging.
That's wonderful. Is that the first time you've mentioned the book's coming out in spring of 2022, or at least one of the first? So
this is right. Yeah.
That is wonderful. Listen, I know that you're busy. Brian Kateman, thank you so much. President and co-founder of the Reducetarian Foundation and lead producer of the new movie documentary I had a chance to watch last night, Meet Me Halfway, MEAT, Meet Me Halfway. Please check it out. It's touching. It's enchanting. It is very, very relatable. The job that you did, I think, was great, and the length was perfect too. I never felt for a second that I was like, oh, when is this? It left you actually wanting a little more. Hence, maybe that's the root of the question. So good luck to you. Thank you. We'll keep an eye out on for everything's happening with the Reducetarian Foundation, and I think I'm going to take you up on your offer. Become a Reducetarian on your way to becoming a Flexitarian. But either way, Reducetarians, Flexitarians, I'll shake your hand through the screen here. Great
Love
job.
that.
It's fantastic. You see, by the way, David Katz's book up there, The Truth About Food. Listen, anytime something comes up, please contact us. We'll be happy to give you some more time on NOTeD. Good luck to you, and we look forward to touching base again soon.
Thanks so much, and thanks for all the great work you do. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure.